Mr. Rainwater,
Hey there, Joe.
take a trip back in time with me.
Okay.
Do you remember, not the moment you remembered that, or you realized you were an artist,
Okay.
but the first time you told somebody you were an artist? Or that you wanted to be an artist? One of the two, either one.
Sure. No, I get what you're saying. Oh, that's an interesting question because part of it is like I've been doing it since I was a kid, so it was always sort of a presumed part of my life in some ways.
Right.
But I think I would say at the point at which I was saying professionally, like I'm an artist, right? Professionally, whatever that really means. That was probably at least a couple years after college.
Really?
And it probably, I don't think I was saying it until after I had finished the first book of Garage Raja, because that was the first time I felt like I had done something professional.
Okay.
And that was like, I had a thing that I could show somebody to say, hey, I'm a professional comic book artist. Right?
Yeah.
That was probably the moment that I can think of. How about for you, Joe?
Honestly, it goes back to like high school for me. Much like how you said, I didn't really admit to it until after I had things.
Yeah.
It's not like it's slightly different. Not that you carry around copies of your comic book with you. You could today because it's all digital, but back in that day, like I didn't carry around DVDs or anything like that. But I needed to have, to me, what it was the reputation. And we talked about how like nowadays I don't give a shit if I ever hit a level of celebrity or anything. But back in the day, you had to have had some kind of rep where people had seen stuff that you had done. In order for you to be like verified, I guess, it was like the original version of the Twitter check mark.
The blue check mark.
But no, I needed, it was back in high school and I was like the AV nerd. I wasn't like the leader of the AV club because that was its own clique, but I did it because I loved it. And I was the one that was doing all the weird shit. Like I was figuring out, if you overlay a static shot with someone else in the shot from another shot and you do a crossfade, you can make them disappear. And like nobody else was doing stuff like that at the time. I know it's hard to believe now. But I was the guy who did a lot of that stuff. And once I had knocked out a couple of music videos for my AV class, I would tell people I was a filmmaker. I hadn't made a movie. I hadn't even made a short, but I'd made music videos to bands that I, had never heard of that were like mainstream bands. So they didn't know that I made music videos and shit to them. But I considered myself a filmmaker. And I would go around and I would tell people, oh no, I'm a filmmaker. And they'd ask me, oh, that's great. What movie are you making? And then I would hawk whatever script I was working on at the time because I don't remember a time where I wasn't writing. And even when I wasn't doing filmmaking, I was still doing writing because I remember when I was a very kid, before we even had a computer. Yeah. This was after typewriters, but before computers, I had a word processor.
Oh, yeah.
And
I remember the word processor.
That's all it freaking did was you could type things up and print them. It was like Microsoft Word was the entire computer, but it was not like the macros and shit like that Word has. Like you couldn't make things in bold or italic. You just had one font and that was it. But I wrote this thing called Old Steve, and it was basically a ripoff of Tom and Jerry. And what I would do was I would draw them and then I would write like, I don't want to call it a manuscript, but it was basically just a story, an essay, whatever you want to call it, that would go along with it. And that was when I first started drawing like original stuff. And I say it was, a Tom and Jerry ripoff, but, the designs of both of the characters were my own.
Oh, yeah. My first original work was like a ripoff of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but they were all mice. So like that was...
It's now we have a thing in common, mouses.
And this was before Biker Mice on Mars also, I feel like, which is important to say.
But that was the time, that I mentally started thinking I was an artist, was when I had my own characters.
Mhm.
And when I started having filmmaking stuff is when I started calling myself a filmmaker. So it was the process of first accepting it in my head as myself and then promoting it actively whenever someone would talk to me about anything. So I'm curious to know from you, because I have my own experiences, but I'm curious to know from you, what was the reaction like? We discussed it when we came up with this topic as quote unquote coming out to your parents as an artist, because that's one of the hardest things to do, I think, as an artist, is to tell people that you care about the most that you want to go into a profession that is very competitive, overcrowded, dare I say polluted, and underpaying.
Sure. Yeah. It's and it's the underpaying part that slowly became something that I became aware of over time, right? It wasn't obvious to me starting out, and it also was not obvious to my parents, which was interesting because like my dad is somebody who has pretty much been in full support of like what I'm doing. So supportive in ways I almost feel like is insane. Like it almost doesn't make sense.
Okay.
But I think on a certain level, like he himself has always wanted to be engaged in the arts. He's always wanted to like write stories, which is part of the reason like why him and my friend Austin are working on a story together. And
Well, that's cool.
he so like he's always been super supportive, even when acknowledging like all of the like pitfalls of it, right? My mom, on the other hand, she wasn't really vocal about her concerns until much later on, after I had published the first book of Garage Raja and like had printed way too many copies of it, which are still sitting in a closet in her house. And eventually I hope to sell, more of those copies in the future, but until then they're going to take up space. But anyway, she just wasn't very vocal about it. And then over time, I think she was waiting for me to like kind of figure out like, oh, this shit's hard. Cause like it's interesting because my mom actually has a lot of artistic talent herself, but she's not particularly confident with it. And she has a hard time expressing herself through art, even though she can do it. Like she's done a lot of photography. So something like I learned later on about her is that there's a moment in time where she wanted to go to like photography school, like in California. And then her parents were like, no, you're going to go get a sensible job. You're going to go do something. So she ended up doing like computer programming, which was a very sensible job at the time. And if she would have stuck in it, she'd easily make six figures if she wanted to. But, she became a house mom. She took care of me and my sister. And, point is she, like I said, she wasn't particularly vocal about it until later on, as I was starting to describe like the hardships of it. And I definitely remember a conversation that we ended up having at some point. Yeah, I was really concerned about when you went to SCAD, like how all this was going to work out, because this never seemed, I never understood how, all the dots connect. Especially when a lot of people have jobs where you show up for the job, right? You get a salary or a wage.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty much guaranteed, regardless of your performance. What your performance actually determines is whether or not you're going to stay in that job long term, or whether or not you're going to get promoted, or things like that. But it doesn't determine whether or not you're actually going to still get paid. Whereas in the arts, not only does your performance determine whether or not you're going to get paid, but there are other like random factors that you can't even predict.
Correct.
Like audience sentiment towards given topics, or just some new medium emerges that everybody starts to get attracted to. And that's where the money goes. So like right now, people who were making NFTs for years before it became a thing are making a shit ton of money off of the NFTs.
Yeah.
Whereas something like comic books has struggled for decades for various reasons. Either because a lot of publishing houses don't do a good job managing their clients and their material, or because there just isn't money. There isn't like a lot of money in it. So you have to, something that I'm learning is you have to ride the waves of like what's coming. And so like one of the waves that I grabbed hold of was Webtoon, and fortunately Webtoon took me aboard, right? And we'll see how far that wave goes, right? I could still wipe out, at the end of
Sure.
this wave, this is the closest I've been to any sort of success as an artist, and it's still it's tenuous at best, even with the good numbers. So anyway, all that is to say, to the long story short is like my dad's always been super supportive. My mom's always been cautious, basically, in reaction to me being an artist. And then, other family members, they just don't really connect with it. Like I've had conversations with my uncle where he's like, "Hey, you still do those doodles?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yeah, only like 8 hours a day, like
7 days a week.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of disconnect that's the stuff that kind of grinds me a little bit at times.
Has any of them ever tried to talk you out of it? Because I know, and it's not so much talking me out of it. Like I remember my mother, this was after Digits. This is when I first started winning awards for writing Haunted.
Mhm.
And my mother was very, not so much trying to talk me out of being a filmmaker, but really trying to talk me into just doing writing full time. You know what I mean? It's kind of like she wanted me to embody that idea of, or that warning of, jack of all trades, master of none, be a master of one, and, you'll be solid footing and this and that. But I'm curious to know, like, since your mom had the reservations, or even, your dad or, uncle, has anybody ever tried to say, well, maybe it hasn't worked out. Maybe you should try something else. Maybe, like, have you ever gotten those kinds of talks? Friends, maybe even?
Well, I mean, I think I've had that conversation with my dad a couple of times when I've like talked about, hey, I'm having these issues financially. I'm not really sure how I'm going to work through all this stuff. And for him, his answer is usually like, well, you just need to figure out how to adapt to the situation. Maybe you do need to, find another job that actually pays you steadily rather than what you're doing right now. Or you can pursue what you're doing right now and see how it works out. He's never like tried to talk me off the ledge.
Okay.
I still dance along that ledge, at least currently. And so, I haven't, no, nobody's like, so far, nobody's been like, hey, we need to have a talk. Like, if you keep doing this, this is going to ruin you, basically. Not yet.
Well, that's got to be promising, because, I mean, there's nothing more detrimental to an artist than someone telling them you suck.
Yeah, right. Well, and I kind of have gone through that. I don't know. I've gone through that for years anyway, and I'm sort of at this point where I'm going to try and keep pursuing what I'm doing regardless. Unless I'm just, I don't know. I've been basically going through this in my head lately where I'm trying to figure out what is the scenario in which I have to be done, Because there is a point where when you're at a certain age, it's like you got bills to pay and you got to take care of yourself. And the idea of financial freedom and the ability to take care of yourself is more promising than like any sort of accolades you might get for your work, or even just being able to make that work, right? Or logically you can think, well, later on when I'm in a better position, I can work on my own stuff. I've been trying to avoid that for years, right? And it's been somewhat financially turbulent. So like, granted, these are the kind of stories that happen all the time for artists, right? Especially artists who end up like later on hitting it big.
Yeah.
They go through these sort of moments where it's like they go through that financial gauntlet where they don't know how they're going to make ends meet, but then they have a story in their heart they have to tell, and you know how the movie goes.
The
right?
story rescues them in the end.
Yeah. And well, I'm sorry. I feel like I got off tangent. I got off topic though, because what was this in relation to in regards to your original question, Joe?
If anybody's tried to discourage you.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm really the only people who have ever discouraged me was like in a previous relationship. And that was a relationship that dissolved pretty quickly after that, because there were several other reasons why I was fed up in that relationship. But I think that to a certain extent, art's part and parcel to who I am. I'm gonna figure out some way to engage in it, and in some way, regardless of what my situation is like. And part of it is just I feel like I'm good at it. It's not even something that I go around telling people like I'm an artist. Like, it's just something that I do out of it comes naturally and instinctively. So it's almost like, trying to stop a squirrel from like bearing acorns. Why would you even do that? That's just part and parcel of their genes.
You're too far in now. That's kind of where I feel like I'm known in certain circles as the guy who made digits, and while that's not a moniker I want to die with. I want to die with, oh, that's the guy that made whatever the last thing I made was.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of those things where it's like, I don't think I could ever see myself not doing this anymore. Like the time to make the choice has come and gone.
Yeah.
And I made the choice.
Yeah.
And this is it now. But the thing is I don't feel any regret about it. Like, if I had to take a job at Wendy's flipping burgers, I could make a peace with that, because I know this is a supplement. This is not really what I am. The kicker for me is I got to get off my ass and actually do things. And being a self-starter, like, that's the hardest part about it, is that, you really have to start trying to pick, like, prioritize things. Like my weight, I've been battling trying to get my weight back down for the longest time now, almost over a year. After dropping 100 pounds, I've come back up about 30 or 40, and I've been wanting to get it back down. But it's one of those things where now I'm also a father.
Right. Well, that's what I was about to say, is like, you probably had the, what do they call it? Like the sympathy pregnancy stuff. And you're also like going to be super busy. You're underslept. Your metabolism's kind of fucked right now. Like,
kind of. It's not as bad as you'd think it was. We're managing that well. The kid is happier than you could be. Finances are going to be finances. They're going to go up. They're going to go down, however it may be. It's about learning to live within a budget.
Yeah.
Me, when I'm trying to work though, that's where it becomes an issue, is because, at his age right now, he needs attention 24/7 while he's awake.
Yeah.
So for me, in order to get a good night's sleep, I need to sleep in, but then I can't wake up early and do the treadmill. And then, I'm watching him, and, if I try to work on stuff when he's around, he's at that age where it's like, ooh, a laptop. Let me just push buttons on it. Let me pull the cord on it. Let me da-da-da-da-da. And then if I, put a gate between us, he wants to play with the gate. He shakes the gate. He comes up to the gate. He starts reaching over the gate and putting things on my lap. Like, it's adorable, but at the same time, the ability to focus, because like, I know you know this more than anybody, because I've witnessed you. When you go into work mode, there can be no distractions.
Yeah.
And
right.
The worst thing is when you love the distraction so wholeheartedly. Like, I don't love social media, and I can fight myself to stay off of Twitter and that attention and stuff. But when my son is giggling or he's doing something stupid, I cannot think about my horror movie plot where there's a werewolf massacring somebody, and it's not, I can't get in that zone. So that becomes a problem for me. Which, and so now I'm getting a lot of the talks from people where it's like, well, you have a kid to think about now.
Sure.
And this is going to sound like I'm making an excuse to be selfish, but I really do believe this. And this is a sincere, honest to God thought right now, is I could not live with myself as a father, not a human being, not as an artist, as a father, if I did not demonstrate to my son the idea of pursuing joy in life. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I've told
absolutely.
this to my wife like a million times. I don't know if I've ever said it to my other family members, but to me, the happiest I ever am is when I'm on set. When I'm on a film set and we're working. Not when I'm on a film set that's a shit show and we're standing around and doing nothing, but when I'm on a film set and we're actually working.
Yeah.
I never like I tell my wife this. I'm like, I would rather be on a film set working for 12 hours a day if we're actually working than go and lay on a beach and drink and do nothing and relax. Like
I
that's not
relate to
relaxing to me.
you. I relate with you in a lot of ways in regards to that. I feel like actually this weekend's the first weekend where I didn't work 70% of the weekend. I still managed to do some stuff today and yesterday, and I always feel weird when I take breaks off because I start getting anxious because I'm like, oh, I could be getting this and this
Yeah.
done. Deadlines being what they are, they always loom on the horizon no matter what. And it's something that is a really weird tension that I think a lot of artists go through, especially like the more that they get into a routine and the more work that they're doing. There is this weird tension of you're constantly working because you want to be at a place where you can stop and take a break. And as soon as you stop and take a break, you're like, I need to get back. I need to get back. I need to get to the next project. Like, it's a really weird tension that I've been, for the life of me, trying to figure out how to properly balance, because I need both of those things and I need them in the correct proportion, right? And this is going into sort of a almost alchemical, like you have to properly measure for yourself what is the right amount of time to work and what is the right amount of time to not work or to exercise or to do all those other, because you still have to, on some level, you got to wash the dishes, you got to wash your clothes, you got to go get
I get a lot of that stuff done procrastinating beforehand, because I tell myself, oh, if I get my office clean, then I'm going to be able to focus better. And if I do that, I'll be carrying that momentum, that energy of getting
I'm the
things done and
opposite. I procrastinate on that stuff working, and I have multiple points, because a thing that ended up like really causing me a lot of stress was that I had found out that I had lit the registry and the state inspection sticker on my vehicle go expired for way longer than I really should have.
Wow.
And so, like, anytime I was on the road, I was like really stressed out, and I was like, I gotta take care of this, because like if I get pulled over, I'm gonna have to end up paying some kind of outrageous fee or whatever. I ended up getting it taken care of, but in order to do that, I basically had to do it in such a way that, oh, here's when the moon and the stars align for me to take the time to do this, because I actually am not on a deadline currently at this moment. This is when I can do it.
Yeah.
And it's just like a very like a less extreme example of that, and that is, I think, a problem that can happen for a lot of artists, where it's like you end up putting off a lot of important life stuff because you're using work as an excuse, right?
Do you think maybe I'm going to have you speak for yourself, but you can summarize in the thoughts if you think it echoes in other artists, but do you think that mindset of I need to be working right now, I need to be working right now on my stuff, comes from the general non-artist observation that art isn't work? Do you know what I mean? Like, we're constantly working to justify that, if I'm working 9 hours on this piece, then it is work. They're wrong. I am working. And like, when we're not working, is it that, you know what I mean? Are we subconsciously listening to them and thinking, oh, it's not work? Do you think that's where that comes from? That overwork mentality?
Well, that is an interesting thing, because I think for myself, I have definitely butted heads with a lot of people on that, including my parents, right? Like, a lot of people look at art as somehow less like work because you're doing what you want.
Yeah. It's the
But you
weirdest
could
thing.
do what you
You're
want.
happy? How dare you?
Well, even then, you could be doing what you want and still be stressed the fuck out. Like that's not a
Yeah.
that just because you're doing what you want to do as an occupation doesn't mean that you're somehow getting away with something.
No. Not
I mean,
at all.
I feel it sucks that there are people who have to work jobs where they're not happy, right? And they don't like it and they hate having to show up every day. I currently am in a fortunate place where I can do what I want and I'm able to do it as I want to do it. But I still, like, just as I was just describing earlier, I still deal with a lot of internal stress on how to just manage myself, which is the really difficult part of like being not just an artist, but like a freelancer in general, is managing your own time. Because like if you're working as a salary worker, a lot of that time's managed for you. And so you have to show up. That's the most important part. And you have to show up by the rules that your employer sets for you, which for some people isn't stressful, right? That helps create routine for them that they don't have to like deal with. They don't have to think about it. All they need to do is to show up, do the work, and the rest of their life is up to them. And so I clearly, though, what happens is sometimes for people who are doing stuff independently, they get a lot of resentment from people who assume that aspect of your life, you're just walking around whistling all day. And it's like, well, not really. I mean,
yeah, no. I get a lot of that, especially when I do my non-film videography work, where people like I legitimately am making a decent income, not a great income. You would think it would be by my rate, but the rate is calculated to justify that I don't have consistent bookings constantly all the time. You know what I mean? Because somebody books you for a commercial. It's not like they're booking you for the commercial every week. You got to pay the bills in between. But I get booked consistently enough that I have a decent income now coming from my own videography. And I still get asked the question, well, when are you going to get a real job? And I'm like, well, if I got a couple more clients, and that's not an easy thing to do. I can't just go out there and just get a client like just because I want to. Like you got to work for that. You have to find them. You have to keep them. There's a whole thing that goes into that. But if I tripled my clients, right, which is doable, don't get me wrong, it's doable, I would be making way more money than I was in any 9-to-5 job that I've had before. Yeah. And I feel like even at that point, I would still have people asking me, well, when are you going to get a real job? And I don't understand what that means. A real job is one in which you make money. But then they find another reason. They're like, well, how does that pay for your health insurance and your vacations and this? And I'm just like, it's always going to be something where they will try to hold you up against some kind of like giant mega corporations perks. And it's well, I don't have all that, but I'm not like crying over it either.
Yeah. Well, and that's going back to what I was saying earlier in regards to there are people for whom they feel a sense of security to have somebody else set them up.
Yeah.
So that they don't have to worry about it. And so and I think this is a somewhat fair assumption for them to look at like, an independent person or an artist and go, you have to think about all that stuff on your own. You have to figure out how you're going to take care of your medical bills and all that other shit.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that. Why are you doing that? It's an understandable thing to say, right? Like, my same uncle who was goofing at me about like my doodles, he does well, right? It's hard for me to entirely just be like, to just completely write him off because he's doing really well. He's about to retire. He's going to retire with all these benefits and a ton of money, and he's going to live the rest of his life doing what he wants. In order to get there, though, he had to do a bunch of stuff that he didn't really care that much about, or figured out a way to enjoy it or whatever, know. But point being, he's set up now. But at the same time, I had another uncle who worked his ass off till the age of like 62, and then 2 years later, like he had a ton of money saved up, and then 2 years later he died. So he didn't even get to enjoy the retirement that he worked for. So I look back.
Kind of shit. Yeah, that's the kind of shit that motivates me. It's like, I mean, it can go one way or the other. It's the same. That's usually what my downfall is with food, where I'm like, well, I could eat really healthy today, but I could also get hit by a bus tomorrow. So fuck it, I'm gonna have the ice cream. And that can be a downfall. Like you do have to find a balance in there, because that, especially when it comes to money, the idea of, well, let me save a little bit as opposed to spending it all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you do have to find that balance, but that really is the motivating factor for me. It's like, I could do this. I could work at this place forever. And technically it's in my field. When I was working at, for ESPN, like everybody was like, oh, that's really great. You have a job with an established company and, you know, you're making decent money. I wasn't. I was making minimum wage, barely a little bit more than minimum wage. And it was in my quote unquote field. I was more miserable there than I ever was, like when I worked at like Toys R Us as a kid. You know what I'm saying? Like working at Toys R Us, I found fulfillment in helping people find toys for kids. Like, oh, what's your kid into? Oh, we got one of those. Oh, this is the hot one this season. Like, and you know, especially at Christmas time, that shit was great. But I didn't make nearly as much money, believe it or not, still at Toys R Us that I did when I was working at ESPN. But at ESPN, I was fucking miserable because I hate sports. I watch professional wrestling. I'll go to a sporting event because it's fun to kill time, and you know, I like live. It's just something to do. But I am not a sports nut. I don't watch every game. I watch the Super Bowl and maybe the World Series, but that's like the it of like championship things and stuff. Outside of that, I don't watch any of it unless I'm live at a game, and that's maybe once a year. And like, that's my extent of sports interest. So like at ESPN, even though I'm doing video editing, I'm doing, you know, production type stuff, I don't care. I'm not into this. Like, I'm not having fun. I don't have, there's no creativity going into it. It's a very monotonous edit. It's just, oh, I have to cut to this now. Like, there's no creativity there. When I did weddings, like I had free reign to just go, oh, I can do an edit here and I'll do a dissolve here and that'll make a really cool shot. And that creative stuff, amongst all the bridezillas and the crazy stuff that I have to put up with, and, you know, the technical headaches that pop up and the gremlins and all that shit, that's still fun to me. And even now, doing like city council meetings, I love that I'm perpetually improving my technical knowledge, because I'm like, well, this is my problem. I have 8 microphones and 10 people. I have to figure out how to justify the levels on certain people, on not the other ones, because some are soft-spoken, some are very loud and pronounced, and, you know, some never talk at all. But do I not want to keep a mic near them because they might talk tonight and I don't know what's going to happen, and I might offend a politician if I don't put a mic near them, and they, you know what I mean? Like, all these kinds of things, I enjoy trying to figure all that shit out. That's fun to me. I feel alive in my medium, in my field, doing it. Now, is it the artistic stuff of Haunted that I want to do? No. But does it allow me to buy the costumes that I'm going to be using in the film? Fuck yeah, it does. And that, to me, is not a motivating factor, but it is definitely a justifying factor. Like, I don't feel like I'm wasting my time by doing that stuff, like city council meetings or, you know, public speeches or whatever shit like that. I feel like I am working towards something. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like I've got like something that I'm working for, and I don't feel like I'm wasting it. So even if I was flipping burgers at Wendy's, that I think would feel like I was wasting my time, because it's like, oh, this is money to live, to keep alive. This is not money to grow, which is what all the money that I've gotten in my company do. I turned around and reinvested it right back into my company. Bought new equipment, bought modern equipment, future proofed it, where it's like, oh, okay, everything's going up to 4K now. I'm going to buy a camera that's 6K. I should be able to get a good decade and a half out of this camera. And that to me is justified. And I'm like, okay, I can make this work and I can learn this stuff. And that's the other thing too, is a lot of people don't realize how much time it takes to learn shit, especially in an artistic medium that goes into antique mode 30 seconds after you bought something that's brand new. I don't know how much trouble you have with that, because I feel like the tablets and drawings and stuff they don't really, I mean, they add new bells and whistles, but there's no real.
No, I'm operating on decades old technology at this point.
And to be honest, for the last while, I have been too. And then I've just recently upgraded because it's kind of a need now.
Yeah.
But I'm sure as, something else comes up your way, you might grow into other avenues where you have to learn new things. But people don't realize that, in the world of like stocking supermarket shelves or, making, soft serve ice cream, there's not really a lot of growth in that technology. You pull the lever, the ice cream comes out, you make the ice cream cone, you hand it to the customer. With art and film, there's new styles, there's new technology, there's new trends, like there's all kinds of stuff that you have to constantly be learning. So that's when I get offended when people ask me, they're like, oh, you gotta get, a real job. I'm like, motherfucker, I'm learning every single day. I am growing. You know what I mean? Like I am on the cutting edge of something and I'm making money. I'm still here. That's the big takeaway. I'm not dead. And when I'm dead, I don't have these problems anymore. So I don't get, there's no real reason to not do it.
Well, what would be fun? What would be funny too is for family members who may not be super encouraging. I think it would be more disheartening if I knew they actually read what I did and didn't like it. That would actually be something that I could respond to in a more meaningful way. But I'm very aware that like they don't know what I'm doing. So it's almost like they're just putting on sort of preconceived notions rather than looking at what's happening. Like they're not seeing the responses that I get from readers. They're not seeing the growth that I have been able to do, regardless of the financial aspects of it. And so without any of that context,
they're
I'm not
speaking
sure.
ignorantly.
Well, yeah, it's that's what I was going to say. Is like I don't know what they're responding to other than like what they're assuming, just assumptions.
The stigma, the stereotype. Yeah.
Because I inevitably, the realities of this world is you have to have money to live, right?
Sure.
At the same time, I don't want to just live my life only to accumulate money. Like that's not
just to keep breathing.
Yeah. Like that's just not the thing that has motivated me to be alive. And the thing that makes me concerned about, the inevitability of death isn't, am I going to ever make enough money to retire? It's, will I be able to finish the story that I'm working on?
Amen.
That's the thing that gets to me, right? Like that's the thing that haunts me at night. And when I'm done with Trailer Park Warlock, I'll reassess where that feeling is. But until then, like that's the thing that my brain is fixated on and I'm focused on, because that's the goal right now that makes sense. Regardless of what anybody says or thinks, that's the goal that I can actually attain and accomplish and complete. So just focus on that and fuck everything else.
Well, and this is, I'm going to out my dad here. I think I've told you this story before. I don't know if I've told it on the podcast, but when we had the premiere of Digits, and this kind of ties into what you were talking about people just assuming things ignorantly and stuff about when you're a filmmaker or artist, whatever it may be. When I was premiering my first feature film, Digits, we had sold out the theater in 24 hours, right? Which was insane that we had that many people show up. However, the biggest arrow to my heart was when it was just like how you see in the movies and TV. When I was in one room and I heard my mother and father getting ready to go to the premiere, and I overheard my father go, "Do I really have to go to this?" And that was one of the biggest like shots to my heart ever. And that's heartbreaking. And if you knew my father, my father loves me. He cares about me, but I don't think he gives a shit about really what I do. The most that my father ever seemed to take an interest in my work was when I had left my job at ESPN, and then I was working the overnight, like the graveyard shift at a supermarket. And these were supermarkets that he had worked in, and he knew the managers, and he knew some of the overnight people, and he knew, how, like, not how to stock shelves, but like how promos and merchandising and all that, stuff kind of works. So he was always happy as a pig in shit to talk to me about this guy. Joey's been kicked around a lot. Oh yeah, this guy here, he's a real pain in the ass. Oh yeah. Oh, when they have the can sale, oh, it's a nightmare. Blah, blah, blah. He loved talking to me about that shit. But he would never want to talk to me about like movies or this or that. Usually the extent of it is, oh, is there a new Batman coming out? That's about the extent that our movie conversations would go. Batman or Star Wars. So when he said that, it still hurt me because, I'm his son. You want approval from your parents and this and that. Afterwards, after the movie, all he could talk about was how funny the fat kid was, and oh, it was so great when this happened, and that was really, and to me that immediately washed away the pain that I had in my heart. I mean, granted, a little bit still in there like a pebble, but the majority of it got cured instantly because I knew somehow I instantly got, it was like validation. Like he wasn't assigning the success of those characters to me. He wasn't like, oh, Andrew wrote that, my son wrote that, and my son directed that, my son edited that, my son shot that, my son made that. He gave it all to the actor, which is typical for fucking general audiences where there's just like, oh, Johnny Depp is so great, and Johnny Depp is great, but somebody wrote that fucking role for him. You know what I mean? Like, but the point is like, he didn't understand what he was going to. He didn't validate what a filmmaker does and how it is. And then even on top of that, when my little sister, once we put Digits out on DVD and Blu-ray and this and that, she brought it to college with her, and her drunk friends would watch it. And I shit you not, almost every single weekend. And I remember my little sister saying to me at one point, she was like, I just thought you were fucking around with a camcorder and just doing whatever, but you made an actual movie. Like it's crazy to think that you made an actual movie. And I was like, what do you think $120,000 of art school in 4 years of my life was spent doing? You think I was just dicking around? Like, so it goes back to people don't really know what it is that you're doing until they finally see it for themselves. And then they start understanding stuff. But even then they don't understand it to its full extent. Like they don't understand the headaches that we went through getting a location or the sound just right, or, something was overexposed or an actor wasn't there that day and we had to film a way that we could reshoot it later where they were there, and this kind of stuff. That kind of stuff gets completely unnoticed and taken for granted from people who don't understand it. It's like any job whatsoever. Like I think my mechanic puts my car up on a lift, looks at something and goes, oh, it's that. And sometimes I'm sure he does, like he's that experienced, but other times he's got to take some shit apart. He realizes something else isn't working. Like, you know what I mean? Like you don't appreciate anybody's job outside of what you know until you know. And that's one of the biggest takeaways for me as an artist. So going back to like my mom trying to tell me, oh, maybe you should just do writing. You're winning awards for writing. You should just do writing. She doesn't know. She doesn't see in her head what I see in my head for Haunted. I know when I do this shot where it sweeps over and it reveals this thing, that the audience is going to go, oh, holy shit. And I know this. Yeah. She doesn't. The people who read the script still don't know it because it's not described exactly that way, but I already know that that's what it is. So as soon as I do it, I fully expect my mom to come back and be like, wow, that was really good. You should just direct things now. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's going to be that turn where it, like, people just don't get it until they see it. And that's one of the hardest things that I think artists need to do when they quote unquote come out to people as an artist, is you have to have confidence in what's in your head. And don't confuse confidence with cockiness, because I've met a lot of cocky artists who cannot back up what they're doing. And a lot of those people don't understand that they have to continuously learn and research every day to keep up with their art, and to improve their art. But you have to have confidence when introducing yourself as an artist to somebody, because that's the jumping off point for them to ask more questions and to take you seriously. Because I would much rather someone ask me when I tell them, oh, I'm a filmmaker. I would much rather them ask me, oh, what kind of movies do you make, as opposed to, oh, is there any money in that? Because I think the tone of the artist's voice dictates the response
Oh
in
yeah,
the listener.
definitely, absolutely. I mean, it brings into mind. Maybe I've talked about this before, but when I went on a trip to Taos and ended up just meeting somebody who was doing a television pitch for like a children's show that they were working on, and it's funny because he had asked me if I could give him like feedback on it, and it was immediately like all my school training came to me. I was like, yeah, I could do that, like that. I mean, I just because it didn't take any time to figure out
Right.
what were the holes in the pitch, what needed to be fixed, how to put something in front of somebody. And it's weird that I had that knowledge, and yet I've never actually done that myself.
Sure. Yeah.
But I know exactly what people are trying to look for when you're trying to sell them an idea and sell them a story. And I definitely saw something come out of myself that I don't usually have, which was a feeling of confidence in regards to, I know what I'm talking about. I don't always feel that way. And I think this is probably part of the reason why a lot of my family look at me with a certain amount of concern, because I don't feel confident around them, because I think a lot of it is like literally everybody in my family other than me has made good financial decisions for jobs, and I'm the one black sheep in the family who's like, well, I'm going to be an artist and suffer the consequences of that decision. And that has certainly given me a certain feeling of isolation in regards to the rest of my family, because they're not connecting to the same issues that I'm having in my life.
Yeah.
And so it makes it harder to have a conversation about that kind of stuff. It makes it harder to relate, because they probably can't relate to the things that fill my head every day, because their concerns are more about either dealing with their boss or dealing with some kind of financial setup within the company or whatever, things that I can't really honestly wrap my head around. It's not what I spend my time thinking about. And I think that lack of confidence people can read pretty easily. You know what I mean? And it's a feedback mechanism. It makes it harder for both parties to talk to each other, unless one party just has to, you just have to dig your heels in and convince yourself you're going to have a good conversation out of it. But it is it's a difficulty that a lot of artists go through. A lot of artists end up being very self-alienating or self-isolating types, because how they live their lives is so unique and different from everybody else. That kind of topic is, I think, it's a deeper topic than probably is within the reach of this episode.
Yeah.
But it is something that you see so many artists who have mental health issues, right? And people assume that it's only because of past trauma or the isolation that comes with success for some artists or any of that stuff. It's the whole thing, though. I mean, it's because part of being an artist is you're catalyzing your life into work, and that in your personal experience into a kind of work, whether that's if you're making statues, if you're a sculptor, you're making a very making a very huge manifestation of your inner thoughts and feelings. If you're a movie director, you're putting your inner thoughts and feelings and projecting them onto actors who then act out those thoughts and feelings, right? That's a whole other.
Yeah.
or you edit it in such a way to make it fit what you want.
Sometimes you got to do that. Yep, I've had to do that.
Or if you're a musician, musicians I kind of envy to a certain extent, because I think musicians have access to something that's so primal and deep that most people can pick it out really quick. They can feel what you're feeling in a very immediate sense. That's different from a lot of visual art.
Yeah.
Because I think visual art is more attuned to linguistics and abstract thought in words, and that all requires interpretation, and everybody has kind of different interpretations. Whereas, if you hear Beethoven's Fifth, it's very difficult you have to try really hard to interpret that in a different way from what you're feeling. You know what I mean? Whereas if you watch Inception, right, for example, everybody has a lot of different feelings and a lot of different interpretations of what they just watched. And anyway, to get back to the roots of this original question, or where we were, all that is to say, I think one of the biggest struggles for any artist is figuring out how to connect with other people, because they're not going to be able to connect initially. They're either going to see you in some sort of like celebrity sort of framework where they're like, oh, you're an artist, you're special in some way, or a different kind of framework is, oh, you're an artist, I'm sorry, like basically, or you're like an alien, which I've said this before and I'll keep saying it. Like, I feel like an alien a lot of the times from other people, because I just don't relate to how other people see the world. And that's why I make art. Like, that's why I tell the stories that I tell and talk about the things that I talk about, because I don't know how else to try and communicate it to people.
I'm weird because I relate to everybody. I'm the inverse of what you just said, because I'm in that weird position where I feel like I could put myself in the shoes of anyone and I can understand their point. So I mean,
that goes into that alienation for myself too, because that aspect of things has gotten me into so much trouble in my life.
Yes.
Because I want to have sympathy for everybody, and then it turns out there are people who are so shitty that your sympathy is going to get you in trouble.
Yes. I mean, the hard part is because there's not a lot of wiggle room to create empathy for certain people, whether they allow it or whoever they're up against goes about it. Like, so for example, you could have somebody from the gay community and you put them against a churchy person, right? Like a very devout, religious person. And part of me, as an agnostic, I'm inclined to lean towards the gay person, because I don't feel like that thing actually exists. But at the same point, I question myself, where I'm like, well, isn't just being like an atheist its own form of religion? Like, you know what I mean? So then I'm also like, well, I'm looking at the religious person thinking, they're too clinging to their religious values that they can't allow someone else to live their life. But does that mean that I'm siding with the gay person because I am embodying the exact thing that I hate about the religious person to my own thing? And it becomes that tug of war in my brain of perspectives. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of artists go through that a lot of people don't understand, is that that is one of those things that fucks you up, is where I don't know where the line of morality really lies. I don't know who's right. I actually think this person is kind of wrong and also kind of right, and this person is kind of wrong and kind of right. And if I voice that consideration, both of them hate me. And it's like, no, you need to pick a side. And I refuse to do that these days. I refuse to side with that. And that's one of the very treacherous places to walk as an artist. Because as soon as I introduce myself to someone as an artist and they start asking me about my work, there's this weird mentality that all art nowadays has to be social commentating and politically driven,
Mhm.
or you know what I mean? And don't get me wrong, art absolutely influences society, culture, all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it doesn't always have to be driven like that. To me, it's a more primal human thing. But
Yeah.
it becomes that thing where I also have to watch my step when I introduce myself as a filmmaker or as an artist, because someone will automatically assume that I am extremely liberal, or you know what I mean,
Yeah.
like far left leaning, and I consider myself more of a centrist, and that creates this weird expectation that like, oh, I'm gonna do this or do that, and people will say things to me when I'm like, oh, I'm a filmmaker. They say things to me that I think I'm gonna agree with, and it's very hard because then I can't really voice in those moments what my actual thoughts are, and I have to kind of put them to the side and go, oh, let's go in a movie later, like.
Well, and that's how I feel. That's the biggest responsibility that artists have right now that is being overlooked culturally, is the ability to not be in the middle of the fight whatever that fight is,
Hmm.
to be able to look at it from a removed perspective, and to be able to, whether objectively or not, be able to reflect it in such a way that people who are in the middle of the fight can have their perception altered enough to take a pause and to
Yeah.
reconsider, because there is so much dogma that is pervasive in our current culture that's making it very difficult. And this is a tirade I'll just be on for forever, but it's making it impossible for people to see the humans in each other, and so
Yeah.
everybody's getting reduced into archetypes, into character tropes, into some movie or story that they've heard or seen on the news, or on some HBO Max series or whatever, to the point that they're not in reality anymore. They're really disconnected from reality. In like those archetypes and those tropes, they exist in fiction. They don't exist in the real world. They
Right.
are pulled from the real world to make it easier to consume things in the real world in such a way that you think less about it when you're watching a show or when you're reading a story. That isn't like a life becomes art sort of thing. It's just art borrows from life and then refines things from life to make it easier, or to make it more consumable, I guess, is another way of putting it.
Yeah.
And so going back to what I was saying earlier, I think it is the responsibility of artists to think more deeply on how they portray those archetypes and how they portray those tropes, and how do they act as a mirror to reality rather than trying to subvert or coerce reality, because you can't do that. You're not going to ever get away with it. Reality will inevitably have its way.
I think one of the important things for people wondering how to introduce themselves as an artist that are listening, I would say, as a piece of advice, kind of about what you were talking about, where you can easily get typecast or this or that. I think one of the best things you can do as an artist is to just be inquisitive and completely answer questions with questions. You know what I mean? Like somebody just comes up to you and, they say, oh, how about them vegans? You just turn around and you should just be like, I don't know what's wrong with veganism. And I'm like a hardcore carnivore guy, but that would be my answer. It's just like, what's wrong with veganism? They just don't want to eat an animal. You know what I mean? Like ask questions, because I think that's the real responsibility of an artist, in my opinion, is to not always give the answers. And that's my problem with a lot of the filmmaking and storytelling of today, where it's like, oh, this guy is bad, this person is good, this and that, is that I don't believe art should be telling me one way or the other. Yes, thematic premise is important to have an idea behind something. But I also think one of the most important things that artists should be doing is asking questions. Maybe I watched the Batman too much this weekend, and the Riddler and the whole inquisitive nature and stuff is getting a little too fried in my brain. But in my opinion, that's what an artist should be doing, because if you're asking questions and an audience or whoever you're speaking to or whatever has to come up with an answer to that, you can change and influence people through the question. And that's what, you know what I mean? Like, that's where good storytelling and artistry comes from, is making people question their own values, making people question their own stances. And it goes back to that, the parable that I gave on one of our last podcasts about, you know, me, quote unquote, being a Republican in art school during finals. And I asked the question to that filmmaker who made a documentary about Bush. I was like, are you preaching to the choir, or are you trying to, you know, sway people one way or the other? And he didn't have an answer to that. And that to me was the thing where he didn't make me question what I was thinking at that time.
Yeah.
And that's what he should have been doing. So to me, that's the important thing. Any last advice on anybody who says, you know, the follow-up or how to prepare yourself to say, oh, I'm an artist, when you're telling someone, whether it be a friend, family member, or just general networking when you're coming up to somebody, you know what I mean?
It's easier when you have something to show. So be
put up or shut up.
Yeah, I mean, if it's something that you seriously want to call yourself, I think you need to have something to show. It doesn't necessarily have to be an entire body of work, but
it helps.
You need to be you need to be able to at least give somebody to react to, other than just yourself. Because unless you're a performance like artist of some kind, then I guess you have to show your performance art right then and there.
Well, but that would lead to what I was actually going to say for my answer, which is mentally put yourself on the accomplishment ladder. Do you know what I mean? And and it's whatever accomplishment that you feel is validating to you as an artist. It doesn't have to be, oh, I support myself fully, financially or whatever. It could literally be, oh, I'm a 2-time New York Screenplay Award winner writer. Like, you know what I mean? Like that alone, if you say it with that mental capacity of this means something, and it doesn't mean shit. It really doesn't.
I know exactly what you're saying, because I have worked on books that are New York Times bestsellers, and I have not fucking sold that at all to anybody. And
we're gonna have to talk about this. I didn't know this, motherfucker.
This is Plants vs. Zombies.
I mean, I knew that was a big thing, but I didn't realize it was a New York Times bestseller. Jesus.
Yeah, well, one of the books was, and it was one that I worked on as a colorist, and I haven't really. Because
You're too
I worked
humble.
on it,
Jesus Christ.
Yes, because I worked on it as a colorist, I was like, I don't know. It feels like stolen valor in some sense, because I didn't write or draw it. But I did actually work on it in a major way, and it's definitely in a way that is worth crediting.
See, I do that shit all the time, because I think it's like a thing of the film community to blow yourself up bigger than you are. It's like expected. I tell people I worked on Saturday Night Live during my internship, when in fact, the only thing I actually did on Saturday Night Live, I was the guy who transcoded the old 1-inch reels that they had from like the old shows, so that they could be put on the Blu-ray, so that they could be sold as, remember when they came out with like SNL season 1, SNL season 2, that kind of shit? That was me. That was my intern job. I just sit there and digitize reels. But I worked on Saturday Night Live. You know what I mean? Like, so I'll tell people that anytime. Oh yeah, I worked on Saturday Night Live, and that immediately to them validates me. And you know, to some extent, I did work on Saturday Night Live, but because they don't understand, and even if they challenged it, I could be like, well, I had to transcode. Do you know how to work a transcoding machine?
See, that's the thing. That's what plays in my mind, because if it was like, if I wrote it or drew it and my name is on the cover, I wouldn't have anything to worry about in regards to, I don't know, somebody actually looking for the receipts and then goes like, well, your name isn't on the cover. It's like, no, you turn the page, and on the first page you can see my name as the colorist. So I kind of that's the problem, is I act out these situations in my head, and then I discourage myself from.
But at the same time, I mean, let's be honest here. If someone else had colored that, it's very possible it might not have found the same success, because it's not recognizable instantly by people. Like, people will see the line art and go, oh, I like that style, but they don't understand the shading and the color choices that went into it. And this, like, if you watch something, you ever seen Ozark on Netflix?
I know what series you're talking about, but I haven't seen it. No.
Okay. One of the biggest complaints about that show is not the writing, not the acting, not even technically the cinematography. It's the fucking color grade on that show. It's so it's dark and it's bleak and it's green and it's just ugly. Everybody hates that. And to me, I watched like the first season and I thought to myself, if this show had a different color palette, I would watch it over and over and over and over again because the writing and the acting and directing and stuff is so beautiful. It's great. It's so gripping. But the color just makes me want to puke. I don't, anytime I think about wanting to watch Ozark, I don't want to watch it anymore because the color turns me off. So the fact that you're, I don't want to call it embarrassed, but hesitant to tout the fact that you were the colorist on a New York Times best-selling book to me is mind-boggling.
There's one other thing too, which is that I have had people approach me thinking I drew it.
Okay. And you have to clarify.
That bothers me because I know how much work goes into drawing that comic, and the artists who have worked on that are really like work their ass off, you know? And so that's something that bugs me on a level because I don't want to take that credit. That credit really belongs to them.
I think it's really important though that you structure your response to that in a way that validates the hard work that they do without invalidating the hard work that you do. That's one of the things that, you know, like if you were to respond, oh, I was just the colorist, immediately you've demoted yourself in importance to what happened with that book. And that's the thing that I think a lot of artists will naturally do because they're trying to be humble and they're trying to, you know, they don't want to be too cocky and they don't want to, they feel like by doing that, they push up on the people who worked really hard. And that's why I feel like it's very important. Like whoever did the drawing and stuff on that book and the writing and all that stuff, I hope that whenever they talk about the coloring, they're like, oh, I just did the line art. Matt Rainwater did the coloring. Like, I hope they're pushing you up.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But like, in a way, we as artists need to figure out ways to not diminish ourselves in order to boost something. And that's such something that's commonplace in culture these days. Like the Batman, like I was just talking about the Batman, right? The Robert Pattinson, Matt Reeves film. The movie just came out and now suddenly everybody feels like they have to shit on the Christopher Nolan movies in order to make the Batman feel like it's a good movie. And I'm trying to explain, I'm like, you know, they're both good movies in different ways. It's like,
it's not like the Super Nintendo and N64. Like these are,
it's, well, even then I still play my classic SNES.
Oh, sure.
And you know what I mean? Like it's this weird thing where you have to beat something in order for it to be better. And that's just the wrong way to go about it. So I would challenge anybody who's an artist who's, you know, hesitant. And this is definitely something to talk about. I wouldn't call it about stolen valor. I would call it more imposter syndrome, where you don't feel like you should get the kind of credit that you did for your work because either it was just too easy to you. But, you know, if I put my dad in front of a computer and said, color Plants versus Zombies, he would be angry because of his frustration level.
I don't know anybody other than... Right. There are a handful of people I know who would actually understand that process.
Right. And you take for granted.
I need somebody help me, right?
You take for granted the ability and talent that you have.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And you don't want to be egotistical about it, but
let's say right now I go into my Twitter and I edit my profile and I say New York Times best-selling artist.
Great. You should.
You think that's an authentic statement to have?
Yes, you are an artist. You worked on a book that was a best-selling I don't know where, and if anybody asks,
sure.
You could literally
I can't answer the question for them. I can show them the receipts. It's true.
Swing your dick. That's big dick energy. Dude, when I was winning film festival stuff, like these film festivals like that I was winning, most people had never heard of, but the fact that I was like, no, New York Screenplay Grand Prize winning writer.
Poster. It looks so good because it's like, because I know that you've gotten all of those awards, and I don't know, like you were just saying, I don't know any of them, but I'm like, damn, that looks good on a poster.
If somebody said, oh, it's not Sundance, like I would be like, okay, name 5 more film festivals. Go ahead, name 5 more film festivals, and they probably couldn't do it. So they don't know what's valid or not. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and I've won screenplay awards, not me, quote unquote, because I ghostwrit things. You know what I mean? And so when people say, oh, how many screenwriting awards have you had? If you go for a Haunted, it's like 17 or 18, I think. But I tell people 24. There are no receipts for the remaining 5, whatever it is, because I ghostwrit the things. But I definitely did win that. And, you know, just because somebody else's name got it, I know that I got it. And there were some bigger festivals. I'm not going into why, because I sold away my rights to the actual thing. But the point of the matter is this: I did that work and I deserved that credit. Now, it's entirely up to you to not market yourself that way. But I don't feel like it's invalid for you to say you're a New York Times bestselling artist, because you technically are. And for Christ's sake, you're almost at 100,000 followers on Trailer Park Warlock on Webtoon. Go check that shit out if you're listening. Subscribe to that shit. Let's get this motherfucker over 100,000. Like, how many times do great things have to happen to you for you to realize that none of them are flukes?
Only with absolute dominance and victory will I be satisfied.
All right, we're going to draw the line there. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I guess the idea that we're coming across today is have some shit, talk some shit, and be confident in your shit. I guess that's the way to go about introducing yourself as an artist. Admit when you don't have all the answers, but when you do, say them. And speak confidently. I think that's one of the ways to assure people that you know what you're doing. And if you don't know what you're doing, go research, go learn, because, you know, 5 minutes of Google search can get an answer to something that someone's going to ask you, and it will make you more validated as an artist. And they'll go past that stumbling hurdle of, oh, how are you going to make money, as to where can I check out your art, which is the question you really want. Yeah, you know, what's your art about? What are you working on? Like that kind of question. So get out there, start working hard. Have something to show for it. Be confident in your work. Be confident in who you are, and go for it, man. Mr. Rainwater, I'll leave it to you if you got anything else. Otherwise, we're wrapped up.
No, I'm editing my Twitter profile right now. So,
attaboy. Go check him out, Matt J. Rainwater at Twitter. And, you know, if he doesn't actually have it in his bio now, I think you should harass him. I'm going to publicly shame him the next couple chances that I get. And my couple thousand followers will now see that he should be promoting that. And I'm hoping that they'll get on the train and we'll all harass him into taking credit for work that he did. Fucking mind-boggling, but whatever. Good night, everybody.
Good night, y'all.